Good morning. Welcome to session 2 of the 2025 Envision Access Conference, Equitable Education for Neurodivergent Learners. My name is Tyler Grubbs. I'm a Success Advisor at Ohio University, and I will be your moderator for this session. Your presenter this morning is Lindsay Rice. Lindsay holds a bachelor's in speech and hearing science and a master's in childhood education from SUNY Cortland. With over 11 years of teaching experience, she is a passionate advocate for neurodivergent learners, drawing from her own experiences as an individual with ADHD and autism. She has presented nationwide for organizations such as the NEA, the OEA, the ATE, the OASSA, and NSA, recently speaking with pre-service educators at Ohio University. As a member of the NEA Leaders NEA Leaders for Just Schools, my apologies. Her work focuses on advancing equitable education, blending personal narratives with scientific research to equip educators with practical strategies for supporting neurodivergent students. The chat window is open for this session. If you have any questions, please put those in the chat. We will pause several times during the session to check the chat. If Wes finds there are any questions there. Thank you, Wes. And before the session ends, Wes will add a link to the session survey for everyone to complete as well. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. I got to hear snippets of the first session. It sounded like a lot of great things were being said, but I was in the middle of a classroom of children, so it wasn't very much time to listen. So I don't know that I'll be allowed to use this title for very much longer, but at this current moment, I am. So we're gonna go with it. I always try to start this presentation with this letter that I wrote for my kindergarten teacher. And so I'll read it and we'll kind of talk about what my kindergarten experience was. I was watching as you sighed in despair. I was embarrassed when you tied me to the chair. I was listening when you complained that I wouldn't sit still. I was learning when your demeanor changed when they put me on that pill. My anxiety was growing when my presence made you mad. You never really realized that I was also sad. I wanted to please you, but I wasn't in control. Your disappointment and anger really took a toll. If you had stopped and not taken it to heart, you would have seen a little girl that had been so excited to start. A brilliant little girl that really loved to learn. But instead of academics, she had to focus not to steal someone else's turn. I wasn't good at masking. I was only 4, but the things you did that year burned my heart forevermore. Now I embrace smiles, no matter the storm, teaching with love, a chance to transform. For the teacher I needed, I've now become, nurturing my students and guiding each one. And so when I was in kindergarten, it was the early 90s, and ADA had been a law for maybe 2 or 3 years. And it did not necessarily extend over, it wasn't actually currently in practice for the most part. And so my teacher got annoyed with the fact that I wouldn't sit still and tied me up to the chair. A couple of weeks later, the principal did come in and inform her that it was in fact a fire safety hazard and that she had to untie me. But the idea that my constant motion and all of these things were in some way to directly make her upset is kind of a lot of times, and this isn't just neurodivergent kids, but kids in general, kind of where a lot of the bad feelings happen. So I just wanted to share that perspective. So I am Lindsay Rice. We already talked about all of this. I'm really excited to be a part of the Leaders for Just Schools because we are a group of educators that are working towards ensuring that our schools are equitable for every student out there, whether or not we're allowed to talk about equity or not. These are my 3 kiddos. They are all twice exceptional, ADHD and gifted. And so a lot of the things that you'll hear about in this presentation are based on experiences that either I have had or they have had. All right, so when I'm in person, I usually make everybody get up and dance, but I'm not going to do that to you all. So what I like to think about is that our mindset changes the trajectory of our scholars' lives. There's a research out there that neurodivergent children receive over 100% more redirections before the age of 12 than their neurotypical peers. So the constant just redirections, most of the time those redirections are not kind, often leads students or people with that are neurodivergent to be very hard on themselves and work hard to kind of chameleon their way through life. I think we can all understand that the way the educational system is currently set up is that if you can't learn in a specific way, then you are in fact disabled. And actually, I was just having this conversation with a colleague about the fact that one of our students' nonverbal IQ is very, very high, but his academic performance is low. But that also has to do with what explicit training has been going on in the last 5-6 years, because IQ isn't just gonna make you know things. And I think that idea that, well, if you can't add and subtract, then you must not be smart, is a real fallacy that hides the genius of many students. Sometimes I'm like, why am I listening to this person? And so because of the way that I've shifted my ideas within the classroom to fit everyone's needs, it didn't hurt the neurotypical children. I taught in Charlotte at my first year there, it was an F school. That is my science data. I was the only 5th grade science teacher in the building. I was able to turn the science scores from an F to a B in 3 years. Most of my kids were ESL students, and some of them had only been speaking English for a couple months or a couple of years. But the idea that anyone can have, that we don't believe in certain children's for whatever litany of reasons. I'm sorry, we're having an announcement. Sorry. Is just not true. So we'll skip through all of this data. So a disclaimer, like I said earlier, I am ADHD and autistic. So if I start kind of not making sense where my connections are, feel free to stop me in the chat and ask me to explain it differently. Okay, so this is, you can enter into the chat, like everybody's familiar with this is a normal brain scan, right? So what I want you to do is when you see the next brain scan, I want you to think to yourself, do you think that you would be able to teach this student, this is a brain scan of an 8-year-old, grade level material? I'll give everyone a minute to get into the chat. Or you, okay. I got a couple of responses. So, I think that a lot of people, I've been told by colleagues that they feel like I'm setting them up on this one, like we're at a presentation about neurodiversity, so I understand. So this is actually the brain scan of one of the girls I went to college with when she was 8 years old. So this is Christina. If you want to learn more about her, I believe there's an episode of Ripley's Believe It or Not on her on YouTube, which is really interesting. I believe there's also a Grey's Anatomy based on her episode, but Christina had the entire right side of her brain removed at the age of 8 due to having seizures. She is now a speech language pathologist, and is one of the most brilliant people I know. And so the idea that poverty or lack of parenting or any of these things that we put in front of children are worse than having an entire hemisphere of your brain removed, I can't see it. I often try to share this with whoever will listen, that we're just not accessing their brilliance. There was a lot of neuroscience behind ensuring that Christina is the amazing adult she is today. And all students deserve that kind of education as well. Okay. Also, I just like to preset before I start talking about people that learn differently, just making sure that people understand that just because we learn differently doesn't necessarily mean that we are disabled. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the College of Misericordia. It is now Misericordia University. I spent my freshman and sophomore year there. And when I was there, I was a mentor in a program for 4 young ladies with Down syndrome. I lived with them. I was their adult, per se. But what I really want to direct your attention to is this cutie right here. Her name is Quinn. So that is Quinn is 4, and now I'm aging myself because here's Quinn now. She is the first person with Down syndrome to be a college athlete. She attends the college, not through the circle of friends, but through her own academic status as a junior in college. And I say that with the warning of what's happening right now, that the dangers of ableism have happened for a very long time. So I don't know if anybody's heard of Willowbrook, but it was a state institution for children with disabilities in Long Island, New York. There is an entire documentary about it. The people that lived there didn't have clothes. They could only clothe one wing at a time. And finally, one of the nurses snuck a reporter in there, and it was documented. And I thought for a very long time that that's when it closed down. But I later learned that is untrue. Right out of college, I was an IPC for the art and worked with 3 Willowbrook survivors, one of which was 6 years old when she went into Willowbrook with a diagnosis of ADHD. So this very well could have been me had I been born decades earlier, and recently found out that Willowbrook didn't close until a month before I was born, which makes it a little bit even more scary. And so the idea that we're always looking for what's wrong with people instead of what's different with people kind of brings us back to the idea that if we ask people to climb a tree as the only basis for intelligence, then amazing intelligence is going to be left on the table. And then with that also being said, understanding that people with disabilities' rights are not more important than the rights of the other children in the classroom. This is my spunky son, Mason. He is extremely gifted, and also I get reports every day that until his medicine kicks in, he falls out of his chair. His teacher's glad we're friends because she said the bruises that he must come home with are crazy. But Mason would really like to sit in the front of the class, but Mason also wants to stand. And so we've had conversation that you have the right to do both of those things, but not at the same time. Because if you're standing in the front of the room, now you're removing learning opportunities for other students. And this really puts teachers in a hard spot. And so I think that when we're advocating for our students, just being realistic about what that would look like in the confines of a classroom. Okay, this is usually a very long presentation, so I'm going to skip that. But Has anyone ever heard of the Kenya study? If you have a person that's ADHD in your life, please share this with them. So they did a study in Kenya in 2008, looking at genetic biomarkers of the nomadic tribesmen. And what they found was that people with ADHD biomarkers were far more nourished than their neurotypical peers. And the reason that that is that although the ADHD and autistic brain may not thrive in the society that we currently live in, when being able to face problems without timelines and things like that, people with ADHD really are thriving. So I think I heard a little bit from the last one that you guys did talk a lot about the stress cycle. It's so important to understanding neurodivergent children. The fact that people try to determine whether or not something is a threat or not for another person is just, you can't do that, because a lot of it has to do with chemicals and neurons that are firing within the brain. I feel like you guys already kind of went over that, but this is a visual representation of what most people experience stress as. Most people being late, it's annoying. Someone looking at you wrong, it's annoying, unless you're a third grader, and then it is full on fight or flight. Being able to make a change in your schedule, loud noises, getting answers wrong. Those are all things that to most people are just annoying. But bringing back to the idea that individuals that are neurodivergent received double the amount of redirections, corrections, being told to do things differently, starting from the time that they were very young. Our amygdala is much more sensitive than those that are not neurodivergent. When I'm talking to people, I try to have them think about it as like in Willy Wonka, where they have the good egg, bad egg scenario. Like most people can differentiate. A lot of neurodivergent people throw a lot of good eggs down as bad eggs because of the experiences that we've had and the way we respond. So a lot of times what this will look like in a classroom is that something happens that you don't even know you did, right? Like you didn't call on a child that thought that they should have been called on. And so now they're upset with you. You don't know that you did that. And now they think you're upset with them. So then, because they think you're upset with them, they start acting like you did something. And because of that, now you are mad with them. And what their brain does is take that as, see, I knew I was in danger, and bolsters the idea that not calling on them was in fact a sign that they were unwanted in a situation. I am not clicking this word, sorry. Also in the idea of the chemicals and things that are being released, cortisol is released during stress and it reduces the access to information. This took me a really long time to understand, because high cortisol levels help you build memories. So, but they do not, so they're good when you're kind of experiencing something. They help you to create those memories. However, if you stay in a chronic high cortisol state, it's hard to access memories. And so my mom has this still at her house, but what this was is a magnet from when I was in kindergarten. The teacher had these little dowels with magnets on the back at the front of the classroom. They were unpainted until you could tell her what your address and phone number was. I could tell you, like green eggs and ham, wherever I was, I knew what my address was and my phone number. But once I saw her face, it was gone. I could not access that information. So my magnet stayed on the board far past all the other magnets into April, when luckily a sub came and I was able to tell her my address and phone number and finally remove this dowel from the board. And so I think you guys talked a little bit from what I could catch about sympathetic and parasympathetic and maybe how the vagus nerve ties into this. So one of the things that I did a lot of research on and finally understood is the fact that these systems cannot be active at the same time. And so what that means is if you're in fight, flight, or freeze, your body basically cuts off the energy going to these other places. In my opinion, the easiest way to think about this is if you've ever had a toddler have a complete meltdown, right? And they cry themselves to sleep. That is what this is, right? They're feeling like that they're being threatened, that they're physical or mental, there's a mental threat, whatever the threat is. And then they thrash, they tantrum, and eventually the body gets so tired that the parasympathetic nervous system turns back on, quieting the sympathetic nervous system. The problem is that our ancestors, when they were in danger, they were in physical danger. So physical danger doesn't have you responding to somebody's text messages. Physical danger doesn't have you in a Facebook fight. All these things are done pretty immobily. And so the body needs to reset by engaging in physical response. Oftentimes our students in our classroom, that physical response is seen as an additional behavior when in fact they're just trying to regulate the cortisol and dopamine going on in their bodies. And so the amygdala of people that are neurodivergent, specifically people that are ADHD, is overactive. I have not been able to solidify the research whether we're born that way or if it's due to our constant self-fulfilling prophecy of proving ourselves right that people are mad at us. But either way, science shows that we do have an oversized amygdala that triggers our stress response much more often. And so the way that I talk to my students about this, because this is good for any student, neurodivergent or not, is teaching them about what we refer to in my classroom as the caveman brain. And basically what happens once you trigger the caveman brain is all your smart thoughts go away. So if you think about, so this is how I teach children this, is if your thumb is your amygdala and your fingers are your frontal lobe, right? So this is what our brain should look like. This gives us access to all the smart things that are going on. But once we flip the amygdala switch, everything is cut off from that frontal lobe, and all we're left with is our caveman brain. And we talk about cavemen don't come to school because they only have 3 choices: fight, flight, or freeze. And those choices aren't okay at school. And so by understanding and being able to differentiate their behavior from who they are has been really helpful in being able to have restorative practice and being able to get to the bottom of why certain things are happening. Again, back to the stress cycle, a lot of people think that in order to have toxic stress, you have to have these horrific tragedies in your life. But in actuality, if you're not returning to homeostasis after you go through the stress cycle, then the amount of chemicals that are building up in your body turn into toxic stress. Just from maybe a child gets yelled at every morning, maybe they miss breakfast, whatever those things are, if we aren't helping them to complete the cycle of the stress cycle, return to homeostasis, then they are in fact in toxic stress. And the reason that's really important is because a lot of the unwanted, quote unquote, unwanted behaviors that are occurring have nothing to do with anything that we can see from the outside. People with ADHD have a lower amount of dopamine and norepinephrine. So people always talk about, oh, well, I don't medicate my kid and like wear it as a badge. But the ability to understand like what the medicine actually does may help people to understand why it's so important. So basically, the medicines such as Ritalin, Adderall, help us to produce the amount of dopamine that a neurotypical person would have. A lot of the unwanted behaviors that occur are due to sensory seeking behaviors to regulate our dopamine. And so what happens, I don't know if you have anybody in your life that is ADHD or autistic, but I always, as a teenager, would joke around that there was this, like the birthday effect. I spent every single birthday grounded. And looking back on it, I understand why now. What happens when we are having an exciting event, right? Our dopamine sparks, or it goes through the roof. We're feeling good, right? But what goes up must come down. And so for both neurotypical and neurodivergent people, our dopamine drips below our baseline. But you'll see that where the neurotypical baseline drips or drops to is where our baseline is. And so when we drop, we're basically on empty. So this can show up in schools when there's an assembly and the kids are all very excited about the assembly and they get back into the classroom and they ask, well, what's next? And so what happens is neurotypical people are able to regulate themselves from excitement back to where they need to be, where people that are neurodivergent don't have that same ability. And so you can support people that are neurodivergent by educating them on this, one, and for younger children, kind of creating a stair step back to baseline so that their dip doesn't go down so far. Also, the issue with trying to use antecedent behavior and consequence when working with neurodivergent people is you can't see our dopamine or norepinephrine levels going on in our brain. And so a lot of those behaviors are being done just to even out the chemicals. So it's hard to understand why someone might be doing something that they are. One of the other, I won't make you listen to that music, but one of the other ways to help kids regulate is high beats per minute will help to even out the dopamine level, as well as bilateral music, where you can either use headphones or turn your phone underneath, and it stimulates the different parts of the brain and helps to reduce the cognitive load and focus children back to where they need to be. This is really important when we're thinking about our high school students or college students with disabilities, because the ability to get work done is often very hard for other people to understand. We often come out of the gate running. So you might have a student that like is already 80% of the way done within the first 3 days, but then never turns in the project. And so the reason behind this is we hit a hyper focus and we can't think about anything else during that time, which inevitably leads to burnout. The way that you can help students with this is just to offer feedback along the way, which will raise their dopamine during the process and sustain their focus on what needs to be done. I always tell my principal, I'm like, if you really want me to get a project done, just poke your head in my classroom and be like, this is amazing. And then I will restart my whole hyperfixation until you notice I'm not doing it again. or, coming down off of it, come tell me how cool it is again. And then I will hyperfix on it until it's done. He hasn't taken me up on this. I'm like, you could really get a lot of work out of me if you would just pop your head in here, but to each their own. And so also when working with somebody that's neurodivergent, specifically somebody that isn't self-aware, hasn't been educated on these parts of themselves, rejection sensitivity dysphoria really messes with our heads. This research is relatively new, and when I started reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this explains my entire life. The idea that people that are neurodivergent, specifically, again, those with ADHD, have a ability to pick up on patterns that other people don't realize either they are doing or that are going on, right? So if every morning, and this goes back to kind of making sure students know why, the last presenter I caught at the end talking about why people's moods might change, really educating them to understand these patterns that they're recognizing. So if I talk to you every time and you smile and you smile and you smile and then you don't smile, I'm going to be like, oh, something's different. I must have done something. And so because of that, if you don't know that that's what's happening, so once I learned about this, I've been empowered to be able to recognize those pattern differences and to inquire about them, right? Hey, I noticed that maybe something's off. Did I do something? Or is there something you needed me to do? And being able to tell your brain that, yes, you saw that, but you still don't know what it means, helps to kind of stop those anxiety attacks and those self-fulfilling prophecies of the stress cycle from happening. All three of my kids are very well aware of this is what's happening in their brain. And so because I have this information, my 11-year-old is going through girl drama, which I'm sure every 11-year-old girl, my husband doesn't understand. I'm like, this is a thing. This is what being 11 is. But to have that added rejection sensitivity dysphoria makes it even more confusing. And so helping her to understand, like, hey, just because your friend didn't talk to you for the same amount of time as they usually do doesn't mean they're upset with you. Like, they have their own stuff outside of you. And having these conversations about, I understand that you notice this. I understand your feelings are valid, but could we dial it back and think about it from another way and maybe ask? Because that's the only way that you're actually going to know. So I feel like you guys might not be as interested in this, but the idea that in the elementary school where children are being diagnosed, a lot of times teachers' responses, and this isn't out of like malice or they're not trying to be mean, but they'll say things like about my three, they can't be ADHD. They're good kids, smart and well-behaved. Well, yes, but my son can't sit in his chair for more than 5 minutes at a time, if he can make it to that. My daughter can't walk she's a competitive gymnast that cannot walk in a straight line when she's not on her medicine. My youngest will get lost often because she sees something shiny and will go and investigate. So it's not a matter of well-behaved, smart. It has to do with chemicals in the brain. And a lot of girls go undiagnosed because of their amazing ability to mask. And so our ability to become chameleons, to the point that we used to host people from overseas when I was growing up through like Up With People or like MLS soccer. And by the time these people left my house, I had an English accent every time, without fail. And so we're really good at acting the way we think people want us to act until we can't. And so that's a whole nother section. I don't know that about a student and how to create replacement behaviors. But the idea that you're just going to get someone to stop doing something, it's not going to happen. And so for adults, for teenagers, it's important that we help them to understand what they can do instead. So my strategy, because turning 18 doesn't make me no longer ADHD and autistic, I still have meltdowns. However, I have another colleague at the school. I call her my emotional support colleague. She has a badge. I bought it for her. It's super awesome. When I am in the middle of a neurodivergent meltdown, usually caused by other adults in this building or life or whatever, I and my very nerdy self will write a dissertation style email explaining why the other person is wrong. But instead of sending it to them, I send it to her. And so the ability to send it to someone allows me to get through whatever I'm in the middle of until I can talk to her, where she inevitably tells me, you are not allowed to send that to anyone else. And so that is my adult strategy. And so what that looks like in the classroom is if you have a student that's yelling and screaming and having these big feelings, they may too need an emotional support outlet. And so I had a student that would yell and scream and cuss during lessons when he didn't understand. So I made him a proposition that, hey, could we take all these things that you're yelling and put them in a notebook, which is what this next slide is. So I was extremely, extremely excited on this day because this did not get yelled. He very calmly wrote this in the journal. He raised his hand, pointed at the journal, and I was like, okay. I'm so proud of you. This is great. My principal asked if I called home. I said, absolutely not. This is awesome. And so after he wrote this, I said, hey, it looks like you might need help. And he came back and did the math that needed to be done. So how we respond to children's cry for help or whatever it is really going to determine how they respond back to us. And so was that note the best way for him to communicate? No. But was it a lot better than what we were doing? Yes. And by the end of the year, we went through phases where instead of cussing on the page, he'd use F star, star, star. And then by the end of the year, we were able to communicate without using cuss words. So, but we never would have gotten there if he wasn't able to stair step those behaviors down. Also, this is the note, one of the notes that I put in the front of their notebooks because of the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Also, teachers are human. I feel like sometimes the society forgets that. And so there are situations where his actions put me in my stress response. And in that very moment, I wouldn't be able to say these things, right? I would still feel these things, but I might not be able to say them in the moment. And so when those things would happen, I'd be like, you know what? I need you to go grab your notebook, read your letter. I still feel like that. I just can't say it. Write down what you think happened. And once we have a moment to cool down, we're going to discuss this. And so by helping children to understand that no matter people, that even though you might be mad with their actions, that's not rejection. And so this really helps people that are neurodivergent. My dad used to write me letters on my birthday every year. And he still does, actually. And so, but when he would be upset with me, he's like, why don't you go read one of your birthday letters? And so having that safety net of being able to remind yourself how much a person actually cares about you, even when they're mad at you, is very uplifting and helpful in these stressful situations. All right, that was the Milner puzzle, but we didn't actually do that. So I touched a little bit about masking. And the problem with masking is that if you're good at masking, and so I would argue the spectrum is less about how autistic you are or how ADHD you are, but people diagnose you on the spectrum based on how much of it they can see, right? So, I mean, I have on the back, like how well are you hiding this is my school badge. On the back of it, I have a stress strip. I have one on my computer. They're everywhere. And so technically that's an act of stimming, right? But because I'm able to find normal ways to stim, people outside wouldn't know that I'm autistic. I had a coworker tell me, there's no way you're autistic. You're so normal, which is a really messed up thing to say. I was like, I don't know how to take that, but sure. And so my ability to mask is usually quite good until certain things stack up. And a lot of times they're really little minute things. So when you do finally have a meltdown, everyone's like, this girl's crazy. And that all has to do with cognitive load. This is just more of what people with autism like to think of our spectrum. And so we all have different pieces that are harder for us to deal with. And due to cognitive load, different parts within our own lives, right? Like, so we're all very good actresses and actors. This is my acting career. It was short, but so this was a very difficult time in my life during this picture. There was a lot of loss, a lot of things happening. And so at this specific moment, although this child right here is one of the most amazing people and is currently a first generation college student at App State in North Carolina. Super proud of her. My ability to mask was very low during this time. As things got better and life became less stressful and I better understood and started doing research on what was happening in my head, I was able to mask more, lowering my spectrum. But that also is just very dependent on what's happening in life. So cognitive load. Has everyone heard of 7 ± 2 Miller's Law? So Miller's Law is the reason our phone numbers are the length that they are. Miller's Law shows us that our ability to hold information in our brain is about 7 ± 2. This is really important when we think about teaching kids how to read. This is really important in the fact this is often why a lot of our most brilliant children end up without any academic skills, specifically in low-income schools. It happens all the time. And other teachers finally don't get mad at me, but my first couple of years here, they just thought I was absolutely insane. The kids that had the worst behavior, I would argue, were some of the most brilliant children in our classrooms. And it wasn't that they weren't smart, it was that their behavior was hindering them from accessing the explicit instruction. And so specifically, if you're a person that is neurodivergent and you're being forced to make eye contact, I can't make eye contact. Most neurodivergent people, if they're making eye contact with you, they're not listening to anything that you're saying because the conversation inside their brain is basically, is this too much? Is it not enough? Do I look creepy now? Is this going well? I don't know how much eye contact I'm supposed to make. And so often, if I'm not making eye contact with you, I'm probably much more engaged in what you are saying. But because we only have 7 ± 2 spaces to hold up cognitive load, if these 4 things are holding those spaces, then you only have 3 spaces left. Obviously, containing extreme feelings, there's really no getting around that. That one needs to be held. Not talking over others, depending upon what the situation is, but not fidgeting and eye contact can easily be just released. In other countries, eye contact is completely, it's rude and disrespectful. So this idea of something that was created within the confines of society and not a natural or innate feature of being a person needs to be upheld to make other people feel okay. is really unfortunate for our students because it's keeping them from being able to experience academic situations in the full way that the other students are. This is also where a lot of unmasking occurs. So if you are spending your cognitive or your masking, because in all honesty, one of these is also being filled with masking. So if I have whatever I'm working on and one of my carts is full with masking, and then all these other things stack up, something has to go, and it's typically masking. That's the one that you can drop. And that's when people think, well, you could act normal during this, this, and this, and you could act normal during this, this, and this. How are you? They feel like it's a choice that you turn it on and off. But really, it has to do with how much space you have to continue masking and being what other people want you to be. I don't know if you guys are interested about learning about the corpus callosum and how it frees up cognitive load, or what direction, or if you'd like to do questions now. But I am open to whatever you guys are interested in.
As of right now, I don't see any questions directly in the chat.
Okay.
I do just want to quickly say I love the idea of a letter, because that's, yeah, they're in. I mean, even just at home, I can, if something's going on, I can say, I need you to please give me my space, go read your letter. You're wonderful and all these things, please, but you can't be around me right now. So that's wonderful. That's a very helpful tip.
There's more on this presentation about dyslexia and different ways to free up cognitive load, which I can go over if that's something you're interested in. So basically, part of the brain is called the corpus callosum. And what we are finding after COVID is that a lot of the kids that were babies during COVID are retaining their primitive reflexes as well as having lower stimulation to the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is how information is shared between the right and left hemisphere of the brain. I argue, I can't get IRB, so if anyone is interested, that midline crossing is actually one of the biggest factors in the opportunity gap within schools. And so if you think about it, corpus callosum is bolstered when you're crawling as an infant and toddler. People, poor people, rich people, people of all colors, crawl or don't crawl, they might scoot, and don't have their corpus callosum fully developed. The part where it breaks off is those people that have means are able to do mommy and me class where midline crossing is happening, swimming where midline crossing is naturally happening. All of these different opportunities are occurring to allow for midline crossing, to go ahead and strengthen the corpus callosum before they enter into school. Back in the day, this is before me, but kindergarten was a skill you had to have before you could go. And that had to do with the corpus callosum. Whether they knew that or not, I don't know, but that is the same idea. And so at this moment in time, you can walk into a K2 classroom and with pretty much 90% success rate determine who can and cannot read based on who can touch their opposite elbow to opposite knee. And so the good news about that is once you figure out that they can't, it's typically very easy to help them gain automaticity with the midline crossing. And so, but the story for the other children that don't experience those things growing up is that they'll start to have developmental delays and things like that. But then when they go to the doctor will blame it on poverty, right? The children with means will end up in OT. And this happens across our country. I did my capstone project on the corpus callosum and educators' knowledge of it. And so on here, you'll see that 40% of educators had no idea to what the corpus callosum even was. The 40% that did know, I was informed, I only know what it is because you won't stop talking about it. And then there were 22% that said that they could have a conversation about it. But I would also argue those were probably people that I have forced to have a conversation about it. So, so what happens is if you're able to free up that movement of the cognitive load. So this is a screener. This is a child who was just learning how to midline cross. And as you watch the video, what you'll notice is she's up against the wall. She's helping herself, right? Now I'm asking her to do it faster, and she just cannot do it. And so when I was in the middle of this presentation or creating this capstone, I'm a nerd again, and had already taught my children how to do the midline crossing from the time they could walk. So I asked my friend, hey, can your daughter cross the midline? And she was 3. It was completely developmentally normal that she didn't know how to do it. It was fine. But she helped me out. And so this is my good friend's daughter. This is Zora, who's going to help us out. She's about 3 in this video. She's like, I don't know what you want me to do. So we worked on it a little bit, right? And so, but her mom worked with her explicitly, I think maybe like 2 or 3 weeks. And then she sent me this video. Look at her in her cute self. There she goes. And so it's very easy to go ahead and do these things, but there's no money in getting that out to the public because it's free. I'm currently working with gymnastics, where my daughter does gymnastics. The owner is amazing, and we're creating a tot class that will ensure that kids get the midline crossing and all of those neuro stimulations within the program. But our goal is to then be able to offer it to underserved communities. So I teach in Columbus. He's partnering with me to have my students be able to come to the gym. We're going to teach science, physics, math through gymnastics, through motion. And that's one of the most like authentic ways that we can help all children learn, but really pull in those neurodivergent children as well. This is just trying to help people understand how people view the world. And so when you're ADHD and autistic, your brain fights with itself. So like sometimes you can only fixate on one point, and then other times you just are taking in every piece of sensory and not knowing what to do with it. So if you want to learn more about the journaling, I did write a chapter of this textbook, Classroom Management Trauma Informed Practice. And my chapter is primarily about journaling and how to better understand the brain and behaviors that are occurring. And I will leave you with this because I think this is the most exciting piece of, I think this is so exciting. So most people would argue, what does dyslexia and Parkinson's disease have to do with each other? And so they're actually housed in the same part of the brain. And so I'm a nerd again and like to hang out on EBSCOhost. And so I came across, when I was working with the corpus callosum, some research about the fact that, because I was looking at music and movement and its effect on the corpus callosum. Well, evidently, they've found that you can prime the brain of patients with Parkinson's disease to help increase their ability to walk. And so show you this real quick, go over the information, and then I have to go pick up my student. Okay, so here he is. And this is his gait as part of Parkinson's disease. Here is the music, and you'll, oops, nope, we're still walking. Okay, so as they start to play the music, watch how his posture changes. So you might be wondering why we're talking about Parkinson's disease at a education forum. And it's because that section of the brain that's being stimulated by the music is the same section of the brain that students that are dyslexic are not activating through words. So I think there's a lot of ideas, again, that people that are dyslexic are disabled. It's not that they're disabled, because you can see right here, all of this stimulation that's going on in the front of their brain, which makes them much more intelligent in some ways than people that aren't dyslexic. But what you'll notice is right here, this green spot, that it's activated. That's the part that dyslexic students are missing when it comes to words. So if you think about the left temporal lobe as activated by a motion sensor versus a light switch. So for most of our brains, when we see words, it's like a light, it's a motion sensor. Our eyes see words, our eyes say, okay, that goes to the left temporal lobe, we're ready to read. People with dyslexia see words, and that's a picture, and it activates those frontal parts of the brain, which aren't where reading is supposed to be housed. And so by using music and movement to prime or turn it on separately from the words, explicitly teaching phonics for 12 minutes allows them to be learning phonics in that left temporal lobe of the brain. And it's the coolest thing because the students realize, like, oh my gosh, I can read better when I do this. And so I'll have students that, you know, we do our music and movement piece, and I get through the 12 minutes and they realize it's starting to get hard again. And they're like, hold on a second, I'm gonna do some jumping jacks. And they'll get up and they'll move and then come back to the table to read. So I will leave you with that, but are there any questions?
Lindsay, my name is Robert Pleasant. I'm the Director of Student Services here and work with Dr. McKenzie on this event and a lot of others. But I have just one, I guess, comment question. So this has been such valuable information that you've provided. I really appreciate this. Teachers, as we have an education department here. So I'm thinking about teachers. Are our young people going into teaching, our students going into teaching, are they getting this information? If not, how do we get it to them?
I'm currently working with the Leaders for Just Schools program for NEA, and that is part of my project that I'm trying to do, is making this free and available for whoever wants it. Because at the end of the day, when money starts getting involved, the message gets blurry. And so I am more than happy to send you copies of the presentation, to work with the college to create an online course or whatever it is, because you can't do something you don't understand. Yeah, and this information, I feel like this isn't just about neurodivergent kids or adults. This is about any child that steps foot in a classroom and is underestimated, because you can't believe in yourself if the people that are trying to teach you don't believe in you too.
Well, you're awesome. This has been awesome. Are there any questions before we wrap up today? Two great sessions, but Lindsay, thank you so much for being a part of this. I also want to thank Dr. McKenzie for organizing this conference once again, and Mr. Grubbs, thank you for being the moderator for this session. Remind everyone that there is an evaluation form in the chat. Please take time to evaluate both of the sessions. I want to thank all the presenters for today. Lindsay, thank you so much for this afternoon's session. And just to remind everyone that we have our next conference already. We're planning for it March 6, 2026. So get ready. Dr. McKenzie, any final thoughts?
No, thank you for attending. Thank you to the presenters. Both sessions were great. Lindsay, you broke my heart with your letter to your kindergarten teacher.
That was good. It was.
It was a good letter, but yeah, I wish you didn't have that experience. But obviously you took that and used it to learn. So we learn from those things sometimes. So again, thank you everyone for attending. We will get the videos up on YouTube once our electronic media program has a chance to go through and do a little magic. So again, thank you everyone.
Thank you
Dr.
so much for having me. And if you guys do want any other collaboration, just email me.
Okay,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.